Good 1600.
Eagle looking great. Roger, 1202, we copy it.
35 degrees, 750, coming down to 23. Altitude, velocity light, 8.5 down, 220 feet. 875 feet, that's looking good, down a half.
60 seconds.
Lights on, forward, 30 feet down, 2.5.
All that we have accomplished in space, all that we may accomplish in days and years to come, we stand ready to share for the benefit of all mankind.
As we explore the reaches of space, let us go to the new worlds together. Not as new worlds to be conquered, but as a new adventure to be shared.
Well, Apollo 11, our first attempt to land on the lunar surface, is of course the climax of many years of determined effort.
To some people it may be just another structure, but to me it's a thing of beauty.
The fact still is that there are many parts, and more importantly, there are many people involved.
In total, in the last hours of checking out the space vehicle leading up to launch, we have essentially a team of about 1,500 people that are working together.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
It's like leading a symphony orchestra.
Well, 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 what a treat we have for you tonight. My goodness, what a man, the famous Bart Sibrel, should I say. We have had Bart on before. We've had the pleasure to have Bart on twice in the past, which has been great. And he is back again tonight. For anybody who somehow might not know of Bart Sibrel, he's known for his moon landing fraud documentaries, including the fantastic A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, highly recommended if you've not seen it, and of course Astronauts Gone Wild, which is one of my favourites, most definitely, a must see. He's been featured on networks like NBC, Fox and CNN, and in his new book Moon Man, highly recommended, a must read, Bart unveils the CIA code name for Apollo, the location of the staged landings, and names 15 government figures involved, some still alive today. This revelation stems from the base's chief of security, who confessed this on his deathbed, unbelievably. And that again is something that people really need to check out. It's fantastic, if I can't say so myself. So I do have a wingman tonight in the form of our English brother, Sensum, a great man. So good evening, Sensum. Great to have you on board.
Hello, mate. I hope you're well. Hope everybody in the chat's well. And like I say, It's an absolute privilege. So thank you for inviting me on to share this conversation with Mr. Sibrel. It's an absolute pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining. So I will, without further ado, bring in the fantastic Bart Sibrel. So, good evening, Bart. Can you hear us okay?
Good evening. Good evening. How are you? I'm adjusting my color there. There we go. I'm trying to give myself a fake tan. I stay inside too much.
Quite right. Yeah. I know the feeling. And here in Scotland, we don't get much sun anyway, so it's all artificial, to be honest. But hey, that's life, I guess, right?
Yes.
It's a, it's a pleasure to have you back on. You're a very busy man, so I'm very grateful to have you back on. And what we're going to do is, like I said, me and both Sensum have got questions that we'll put forward to you. So before we get into them, I think you said in the past you seen or watched the moon landings at 4 years of age. Then, when you were 14 years of age, you first heard about the possibility of them being faked. Then you went on into movie making or film making, and at 24 years of age, you began to really look into it. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Great stuff. So I'm glad I got that right. And just before we get into questions, how did it feel for you when the penny sort of dropped in your mind and you thought, oh my God, they faked it? How did you feel?
Well, it broke my heart. I was not just a believer in the moon landing. I was like their number one fan. I had a shrine since 4 years old in my bedroom of about 10 to 20 9x12 color prints of Apollo 11. And my dad was in the Air Force, and wherever we moved, that was a centerpiece in my room. So I saw these pictures thousands and thousands of times, probably 15,000 times. I looked at the pictures, believing and mesmerized, you could say, but also open-minded. And once that, there's a saying, eyes wide shut. I talk about this in the book. That, and this is the example I use. This is at least the way my mind works. I don't know if it's the same for every human being, but let's just say you have a bunch of kitchen cabinets, above the sink. And so the salt is always in the top left cabinet, top shelf of the cabinet on the left-hand side of the shelf. And it's always there. It's been there for 10, 15 years, right? So someone comes along and they put it in the same cabinet on the same shelf, but they put it on the right side of the shelf. So I open it up, I'm looking to the left, and it's like, where's the salt? Technically, it's in my vision, right? But I'm focused on the left side of the shelf for the last 15 years. I don't see the salt, literally. Where is it? And I'm looking right at it. So the same as with the pictures. The evidence of the fraud is right there in the pictures. Go to Sibrel.com. There's a 3-minute video on the homepage that can prove the moon landing fraud in one photograph. In sunlight, shadows are parallel, always, no matter what. Go outside, 2 trees, 2 telephone poles, 2 people standing on the yard on a cloudless day, which I think you get twice a year there where you are. And you can see. And then these Apollo pictures, sometimes from objects 5 feet apart, have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees. Well, I'm a filmmaker. My job is to make fake scenes look real, and that's electrical light, which means they're not on the moon. So all of these evidences are right there in front of everybody, but they don't see them because they assume a belief that they're real. So why bother looking for clues that it's fake? They won't do it. Why should I look to the right of the shelf when the salt is always there on the left? And so it's the same way. In the original pictures, the soil of the fake moon surface was caramel brown because that's the color it actually is. They knew this from an unmanned probe. If you look at the Chinese pictures, the soil is caramel brown. Look at this picture behind us here. It's gray. The background's gray. Well, why is that? Well, in the original pictures, that soil, where the lunar moon rover wheel is, that was caramel brown. It was almost the color of the hub. If you can see the hub, or what do you call it? The fender above the wheel, whatever you call that wheel covering, that's the color the soil normally was. But the background was grayish blue. They didn't match. So you could see a line going across between the real soil and the fake backdrop. And so that was a problem. So they've since color corrected all the pictures to make the soil this grayish blue color to match the backgrounds. But that's not how it was originally. So you had all these clues and people didn't see it. So when we found this classified footage of fake photography, and you can see it for free at Sibrel.com. It's in the film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, a $1 million movie series financed by a board member of an aerospace company who builds rockets for NASA, who knows the moon missions are fake, who gave us $1 million to prove it because he thinks it's outrageous. And we got a classified footage of them faking being halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight. Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin are on camera. There's a third track of audio of the CIA prompting them how to fake the shot. The lights come up and it's a 1 foot model of the Earth instead of the Earth really floating in space like they're claiming. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. How sad is that? Not for mankind, not for, not for America, but really for mankind is what I meant to say. That this is who we are. This is who we are as a species, as a race, that we're so juvenile and arrogant and devious that we would lie about the greatest accomplishment of all time. Now, as you mentioned, I don't know if it was in the recording or before, but I've given lots of interviews. And about maybe 2 months ago, my interviews have a new energy to them, and it's just anger. And you know what angered me, William and Sensen? Someone sent me a picture about 2 months ago of a lunchbox from 1969. You know, the metal lunchboxes that kids like us have, at least older kids. And it said, you know, Apollo 11 and the lunar lander and them setting foot on the moon. They're brainwashing children. And then that beautiful presentation that you did, you know, at the opening of this program, all those people on the ships thought it was real. All the people at NASA thought it was real. The flight director said the guys in the command center at the consoles can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and an actual flight, just numbers on a screen. They didn't know. A handful of people knew, just like the atomic bomb, which also involved hundreds of thousands of people, but only 8 people knew what they were building. And only about 8 people at NASA knew that they were really not going beyond Earth orbit. And I just quietly wept. Tears came to my eyes, and I'm like, wow, they really did fake it. It's not a conspiracy theory. And I'm having these epiphanies even now. You would think I'm done thinking about it, but I'm not. The number one key, there's a key to a door. You're trying to open the door. The door is the corruption in our government and really world governments, because everybody imitates America, right? And no offense to Great Britain or United Kingdom, you guys were first. And so all governments, for the most part, are corrupt, with rare exception. And now the most powerful country, at least in appearance, is the United States, and their greatest accomplishment is putting a man on the moon. And all those people were fooled. Every newspaper, every TV station, all the people in the military, my dad in the Air Force, who did many secret projects, believes the moon landings are real. I mean, because he wants to believe it's real, right? Just like a kid wants to believe in Santa Claus. They want to believe it. I did Glenn Beck's radio show a couple of months ago, and he's insulting me. Oh, that's dumb and stupid. And I'm like, well, what about the video of NASA admitting the technology to leave Earth orbit hasn't been invented yet? I have that on video. No, you don't. Well, I do. No, you don't. And I'm like, you haven't read my book. You haven't seen the video that you're criticizing the content of. Then he has on an Apollo astronaut who has the audacity to say he's a Christian and therefore you must believe him. And he's, complicit to multiple homicides. And Glenn Beck is fawning over him because in his mind, America's gotten bad, but at least we went to the moon. And if you go to Amazon, go to Sibrel.com, click on reviews. There was a review maybe 2 back, and they said the following, which is just dawning on me. The key to opening the door to bring down the corruption is the moon landing fraud. The person wrote in the last, sentence of this 2-paragraph review, if the public finds out the moon landings were fake. It will bring the deep state down because they will never trust the federal government ever again. You know, whoever killed Kennedy, he's still dead. It's just a matter of who did it and why. 9/11, it's a real event, right? Those buildings came down, but it's just a matter of who did it and why. This is different. An entire fabrication of the greatest event in human history, right? And it was an unnecessary lie, completely unnecessary. NASA has never kept a schedule in their entire history, not once, except the most complicated untried mission of all time. They're at a schedule. 54 years later, they're 100% behind schedule. They say they're going to have men orbiting the moon in 4 years. In 8 years, they have mannequins orbiting the moon. But somehow, 54 years ago, you can play golf and drive on the moon in a car, you know? And so the outrage, this is why this is key. This is so important. It just, if you go and watch A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon at Sibrel.com, this is a spiritual representation of something between good and evil, between boasting. We show the Tower of Babel that was simply built to show off, never finished. The Titanic, the biggest machine ever built by the human hand that they put in print, the ship that God himself could not sink, never made one voyage. And then Tricky Dick Nixon, when he knew they were not on the moon, said putting a man on the moon is second only in greatness to God making the universe. You see? So thanks for that opening rant, and back to you guys.
Yeah, spot on. That was great. Yeah, I put that sort of intro together a couple of days ago, and Sensum, he made the music for it. So if you're ever looking for someone to make a bit of music, he's your guy. It was great. So fantastic. What I'll do is I'll ask Sensum now. He's got a couple of questions, and we'll take a question each, and we'll go from there. So on you go, Sensum.
Yeah, that was a superb introduction, and a lot of the items that you touched upon, I was refreshing myself because I actually have Moon Man, but I've also got the Audible version, so I could listen to it as well. And obviously, you're the narrator, which makes it even better. But one of the things that you actually mention in Moon Man, which is one that once you understand, you know, the size of this cover up, the question I wanted to ask, and I'll qualify this very briefly after I've asked the question, is why do you think the film Capricorn 1 was produced and released? And the reason why I asked this question is because of when it was done, which was about 10 years or so after the moon landings, shall we say, we'll put that in quotes, had occurred. By then, I can only see this personally. I can only see this in one of two ways. And the first way is that someone in the know who knew it was fabricated, but obviously because it had to be such a tight, closed loop on who knew the truth, the Hollywood producers may or may not have necessarily known what was going on, especially if you look at how complicit they are these days. And therefore, when they went with this idea, somebody effectively recreated what occurred in 69, but instead of the moon going to Mars, obviously with a little bit more, like a little bit of action element in etc. So it was basically somebody who knew what was going on and sort of did a sleight of hand because the wider regime, shall we say, didn't know, or they did know and it was pushed out there so that any subsequent naysaying with regards to questioning the validity of the landings could then be said, oh, you're just watching too much sci-fi, you've been watching that Capricorn 1, you know. Yes, if you want to believe Hollywood. So I don't know what your take on that, why they would allow, or why they, you know, if it caught them by surprise, or if it was just what we would term in wrestling terms kayfabe by the regime, just to put something out there so that anybody like yourself who subsequently said, hold on a minute, this is irrefutable that they didn't do this. People say, "Oh, you've been watching too many Hollywood movies." What's your opinion on that one, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. There's a film, me being a filmmaker, and one of my favorite films is about filmmaking. It's called Precious Images. And I got a 16 millimeter print in 1988 that I literally borrowed from a Hollywood library, paid to have it transferred to videotape, because the only way you could get a copy of it. It won, I think, Academy Award for Best Short Film. And it's 6.5 minutes long, and it has this beautiful scores from various films in it. And it shows all the greatest films that have ever been made in 6.5 minutes, meaning each clip is generally about 1 second long. If you can imagine, for 6.5 minutes with beautiful music, 1 second of all the greatest films ever made. All of them are fictional, including one clip of Men on the Moon somehow inserted in the middle of it. You see, the people in Hollywood knew it was fake from the lighting, just like I knew it was fake from the lighting. I remember I was working for a filmmaker who's more experienced than me. And I did a series of films that won awards: Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Top 10 Director. And they were really my first films I made. I made them at the age of 26. And one of them, in fact, I think one of these is on the homepage of Sibrel.com, had, a sunset out the window. Or at least what appeared to be. And the filmmaker says, a beautiful job of using the sunset out the window. And I said, well, that was an electrical light that made it look like the sun. So I fooled even him. And so I can tell. In fact, I went to a wine tasting one time, and the guy who, leading it, whatever the name is, there's a name for people who are experts in wine, whatever that is. And he would, take a wine and say, this is from France. This is from the southern region. This was about 4 years old, and it was made in a dry summer, something like that. I'm like, gimme, you're BSing me. But he wasn't. Somehow he could tell. And I mean, the shadows going like this in sunlight and this in electrical light, anyone can see that. But I can tell you what kind of light they used, because I had them in my closet. You know what I mean? And they were precious to me. I could barely afford them. A type of light that they've been using in Hollywood for 20 years, I just got because it's finally cheap enough. And so people in Hollywood saw that it was fake, and they inserted that into Precious Images as a telltale little clue. And then I believe the people in Hollywood intentionally made that as their way of saying, look, guys, pay attention. Now, the film is about a fake Mars landing, because they don't want to blaspheme the sacred cow. It's a sacred cow, but it's a false idol. If you've ever read the Bible, I mean, it'd blow your mind how many times Israel is worshiping pagan idols, sacrificing their children, and all sorts of weird and bizarre things. In fact, probably most of the time. And so what is the TV show? American Idol. Well, the Bible says one of the 10 commandments, don't have idols. And this is an idol putting men on the moon. So they made this movie as to kind of cry out. So to not offend people, they made it a fake Mars landing. It had the top people at the time. I mean, every top actor was in it. Elliot Gould, he was the Tom Hanks of the time. There was nobody a bigger star than Elliot Gould. And then James Brolin was in it, and Sam Waterston was in it, and Hal Holbrook was in it, and Karen Black was in it, and Brenda Vaccaro was in it. And so many famous people were in it. They wanted to participate in the movie. Now, if you get like the 25th anniversary or something DVD, they reassure everybody they believe the moon landings are real. I don't think that at all. That would be like saying I'm a big fan of Michael Jackson, but I'm going to make a parody that everyone will know is a parody of Michael Jackson about a pedophilia. Okay? When I believe he's really innocent in real life. Why would I do such a thing? I would never, if I believed Michael Jackson was innocent, I would never make a parody that is obviously of him, of some pop star child molester. You know what I mean? And I don't know that he did it. I'm not saying he did it. I'm just saying, for example. So if they really believed the moon landings were real, they would never make the movie. Why they're saying that in the comment section, I don't know. They want it to fly under the radar. And let me tell you the effect of it, because I don't think I've said this in any interview. I found that movie deeply motivational to who I am today. And maybe had that film not been made, we might not even be having this conversation. I don't know. But as you know from the book, and again, like you said, I read it myself in Audible, Kindle or print, Sibrel.com. I talk about how I originally turned down the project. I mean, I started investigating it, and all these things seemed odd to me if they really went, including the administrator of NASA, right, who was going to be, I put men on the moon. He resigned days before the first mission, didn't want to have anything to do with it. That's a little odd. 2 of the 3 people who participated in the first greatest mission don't ever give interviews unless the president of the United States asks them to. And then at their press conference, which I only show like 10 seconds of in my 45-minute movie, they look like they're at their mother's funeral for an hour instead of the winning locker room of the Super Bowl. Something's wrong. And I'm like, something doesn't smell right spiritually about this. And I said to myself, I like puzzles, and I kind of have a relentless, never give up personality. Just watch Astronauts Gone Wild. And I said, if anyone could figure out whether they really win or not, it might be me. But if I start looking into this and they really did not go, I could be risking my life. So I turned down the project. It wasn't until 5 years went by and I started thinking spiritually about it, that this is a battle between good and evil, right and wrong. And if they really did fake the moon landing, I'm talking about deceiving the whole world, putting it on coins. It's on a 50-cent piece from the 70s, Men on the Moon. It's on stamps. It's in the encyclopedia. It's taught in every American university that it's real. They held ticker tape parades for them. They gave them medals of honor for being so dishonorable liars. If that's true, embezzling $200 billion, murdering innocent astronauts and people to cover it up. If that's true, that is so much more profound historically than if they'd actually gone. And it is true. It's not a theory. They faked it. We have 4 times the proof to prove it. And so this fact that they really did fake the moon landing, still being technically not known, it needs to come out. If you have cancer, you need to know. If your front wheel is about to fall off, you need to know. And so I said, this is worth dying for. I'm going to die anyway. Might as well go out in a blaze of glory. And if you read my book, for the first time ever, I go into literally multiple life and death jeopardy events I went through to prove this. Literally being drugged by the CIA and finding a recording of an Apollo astronaut and his son. You can hear it for yourself. My book is interactive with 17 video clips that you are at Sibrel.com now. They say, do you want to call the CIA and have me whacked? Right? And so this is serious business. If they really went to the moon, and I'm some silly person who thinks it was done in a TV studio, why would they care? And then this book that took me 15 years to write contains all this information that I've never talked about before, including a 4-hour interview I did with the widow of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. She says he was murdered by the CIA. She said it, not me, for not cooperating with fraud at NASA. So this is the way that it is. And I think Capricorn 1, they shouldn't have made that one because that planted a big seed in my mind. And I saw this great possibility. And what did they say? People who believe, terrorists did 9/11, they said, one of the reasons why we couldn't prevent it is we didn't have the imagination to think through what someone else might do. Well, that does apply, even though some people, I hate to mention names, but maybe if you know initials DC may have had something to do with that. In any case, we have to consider things. In fact, I did an interview not too long ago with someone in Sweden or Norway, some student who believes the moon landings are real, but is tiny bit open-minded. And it's just like, but not really. And then when I brought up this little thing that's been going around for 3 years and how that's probably not true, then she's like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. That. So why is she like that? Because she doesn't have the concept, the imagination, the understanding, the perception to know how evil and wicked the world really is, right? I mean, I hate even saying it out of my mouth, a baby being raped. And I'm like, how could that possibly be true? How could that be true? But maybe there are people who do such things. And there are people who kill, and there are people who lie, and a lot of them, if not most of them, are in power, because when honest people start going up that corrupt pyramid, they would rather just not have anything to do with it and spend time with their family. And so what is at the top? A bunch of criminals who are psychotic, pedophilic, murderous, thievery. I mean, we're literally run by gangsters. The American government is run by CIA gangsters. That's what it is. Look at the picture of Brennan, former CIA director. If you put his picture in a 1930 picture beside Al Capone, you would swear that just based on the image and his expression, he's more murderous than Al Capone. And this is the way it's done. And so if the truth comes out about the moon landing fraud, I think the house of cards might fall down. And that's why as soon as the Russian former director of their space agency 3 or 4 or 5 months ago said the moon landings are fake, they immediately have on the one and only Christian, astronaut reassuring Glenn Beck's Christian audience that the moon landings are real. And then about the AI. Go to Sibrel.com. There's a new revelation just came out. The most intelligent entity on the planet, Google's neural network, meaning multiple AIs hooked together in a network. They showed it off at a big convention about 3 months ago. They only let people test it for 3 days, have it write a symphony, write a novel. Well, one team fed it pictures of the lunar surface from the Chinese probes through its special deep fake detection program that can tell you in 1 second whether a video of Trump or Biden is real or not. Never been wrong. Feed it pictures from the lunar surface from the Chinese unmanned probes, says they're real. They fed them pictures from the Apollo missions, they said they're fake for multiple reasons. And they are trying to suppress this story. They are squashing it. Right? Not on Fox, not on RT. And if you go to the original link and you want to click on it, it says, if you proceed, data from your computer will be stolen and you'll be associated with child pornography. And go to Sibrel.com and scroll down. You'll see a clip of this warning. If you click on the story about the AI saying the moon landings are fake 3 months ago, you'll be associated with child pornography. That's how desperate they are. Because maybe they see it's the key. It's the key to bringing down. In fact, the NBC News director I showed that classified footage to said the same thing 20 years ago, and I didn't believe him. He says, I'm not going to broadcast this. It'll cause a civil war. I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, nah, you're overreacting. Maybe not. It's not against each other. But I don't know what would happen. Let's say the whole federal government is powered by one plug in the wall of electricity. Let's just assume that, this unplug it. I'm not sure anyone would notice, really. Right? Maybe keep Social Security, right? Maybe the states could take that over. I mean, if you're not paying a third of your income anymore to people who are going to deceive you and kill people who try to expose their crimes, which is the greatest crime of all. We started this nation, no offense, to get away from King George, who was less of a tyrant than we have now. He said, when any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Well, life. They've become destructive of life. They're murdering their own people. According to Apollo astronauts' relatives, they're murdering them to cover up their crimes. Right? And liberty, you have to ask permission to go to church, permission to open your business, permission to have more than 4 people at your son's birthday party, First they say you can't have a wedding, then they say you can have a wedding, but you can't dance. First they say you can't go to church, then they say you can go to church, but you can't sing. Either one group of people are the parents and the other are children, or one group of people are the masters and the others are the slaves. How did this become normal? One group of people telling another group of people that they can't dance at their wedding? What the heck is that all about? That's slavery, people. Wake up, get your faces out of your cell phones. I'm sorry, rant number 3. I told you that lunchbox got me going. Back to you guys.
Have you got anything to add to that, Sensum? That was a great question, by the way.
No, well, like I say, it was a very reasoned and elaborate answer. But I'm 100% on board with what you're saying. I was a very unenlightened person. I mean, I'm in my 50s now. I don't mind saying that. People say I sound a little bit younger than my voice, but I am.
Yeah, you sound 49 to me.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And 11 months. Yeah. But when one of the things that you mentioned, and you iterate this again in the book, when my eyes were opened, and I think my turning point was pretty much 2015, 2016, when we saw the absolute meltdown of the United Kingdom wanting to leave the European Union, the so-called Brexit escapade, and then Donald Trump being elected. There just was a complete and utter sort of, they didn't even try to hide their disdain for ordinary people's, the so-called democratic process, shall we say, which we know is, is less than democratic, because, as a famous person once said, if democracy worked, they wouldn't let you have it. And I now don't see things because everybody wants to compartmentalize things into left wing and right wing, and I gave up on those terms several years ago, and particularly after what happened from March 2020 to February 2022. I now see things very much in the light of good and evil. So, when you look at something, you can't just say this is left wing or this is right wing. It's far easier to just look at things on face value and say, no, this is plainly evil, or this is genuinely good. And unfortunately, as we've seen recently, not only are the majority of people in power on the side of evil, that side, for the time being, appears to be working. But thank you very much for that answer. It was wonderful. Thank you.
I think good. Well, go ahead, William.
Sorry, no, on you go, Bart.
Well, I was thinking, listening to you, Sensum, let's just say people don't like the word good and evil. Maybe that's too religious for them. So let's talk about it from a secular point of view. It's about what's fair, right? It's in Monopoly, right? You land on free parking, you get $500. I land on free parking, I get nothing. That's not fair, is it? You see? And so it's a matter of being fair. And 90% of Americans insisted that they have GMO labeling on the food they swallow. The most dangerous thing a person does every day, it's not driving your car, it's not putting shingles on your roof, it's not flying in an airplane, it's eating. We swallow about 2 pounds of foreign substances a day. If you add water, it's probably 3 pounds, right? That's the most dangerous thing we do every day, is swallow 3 pounds of whatever, right? From McDonald's or packages of potato chips that have 20 ingredients on them. And so Americans wanted GMO labeling, contains GMOs. It's a pretty fair request, isn't it? You know what percentage of Americans wanted that? 90%. Have 90% of Americans agreed on anything? Well, they agreed 90% to stay out of World War II on December 6th, 1941. And then on December 7th, 90% were for joining. But in any case, 90%, and the government refused to pass the legislation. I thought a democracy was 51% getting their way. You see, it's a matter of being fair. The Constitution says that involuntary servitude, right, forcing someone to work for you, which is pretty much slavery, even though technically that's two different constitutional amendments, it's illegal unless the federal government does it for drafting you into the army. No, fair is fair. If it's illegal, it's illegal for everybody. If it's a government of the people, by the people, for the people, then it's the people. So the people that no slavery, no involuntary servitude applies. It applies to the people who are in the government. They're both people. It's a government of the people. So the rule needs to apply to both, right? They have all these rules for the Americans that don't apply to government employees or the federal government or the president or the Congress. No, that's not fair. You can call it evil if you want, but let's just say there is no God that you want, or that's what you believe. It's a matter of being fair. There's so much set up in the federal government that's just not fair. How can an elected official say before they're elected, out of their mouth multiple times, when I'm elected president of the United States, I promise that I will not make taking a medicine for an illness you don't have mandatory for federal employees or for anyone. And then 6 weeks after they're elected, they make it mandatory. I think that should be illegal, right? Anytime a government employee or someone running for office says that they promise to do something or promise not to do it, and then they do the opposite, they should be immediately out of office and thrown in jail for 20 years. That would be fair. And in fact, the last chapter of my book at Sibrel.com is what to do about this mess. And I propose a few ideas, including choosing elected officials by lottery. That's the way the first democracy did it 2,000 years ago, and their democracy lasted 500 years, and I don't think we're going to make it past 260 years, in my opinion. And so if we can decide a capital case, whether someone is executed or not, based on choosing 12 people at random, I think we can choose 12 people at random to decide whether a bottle of ketchup should have contained GMOs on it or not, right? And so and then those people, let's just say, I don't think we need Congress and Senate, just have one or the other. And then you elect people at random. Then those people among themselves nominate maybe 5 people for president, assuming we still need a president. And then the public sees the debates of those. And we have extremely fair rules. Then they vote, narrow it down to 3, vote, narrow it down to 2, vote, narrow it down to 1. Very simple. You have 1-term limits for everything, right? And why not have government go backwards? This top-down government has been around for thousands and thousands of years, and it's always been called tyranny. So why do we still have top-down government in a democracy? If I say electrical current can flow down the copper wire from left to right, it can flow right to left. So why not have up government instead of trickle down economics, giving billionaires tax breaks so they can, hire more butlers and bless the butler class? Why not, instead of giving $3 trillion to the bankers who caused the problem, give every citizen over 18 a check for $20,000? What would they do? They'd go out and buy washers and dryers and cars. And that would trickle up to the millionaires who own all those factories and companies selling the washers and dryers and cars, right? And so why should the mayor be able to tell the resident association what they can and cannot do? Let's just say the mayor says, or the city says, there's no guns allowed. But a neighborhood, let's say a subdivision, wants to have the right to carry a gun. Why should the mayor, who doesn't live there, tell the neighborhood what they can and cannot do? In fact, why should the resident association be able to tell the landowner that they can't have a garden in their front yard because it's not aesthetically pleasing? They don't live there. It's not their property. The landowner has the first right. They can do whatever they want on their own property, right? And then the resident association is second, right? They can't tell the landowner what to do. The mayor can't tell what the resident association to do. The governor in Sacramento can't tell the mayor of Los Angeles what to do. They don't live there, right? And then the president can't tell the governor what to do. If electricity can go one way, it can go another. And guess which way promotes freedom and no dictatorship? Bottom up. Bottom up government. Why don't we give that a try, folks? You know what I mean? We need a completely new system The way that we have now, all these criminals are writing rules to make their crimes legal. You know, and you can call it evil, which it is, but for those who don't believe in good and evil, it's just fair, right? We need to have fairness. If 90% of the population can't have their way, that's not fair. And if a federal employee, a Congress member, can be racist legally, they can hire all white people or all black people or whatever, and that's legal. But a private company doing that, that's illegal. Do you realize that? And so they have all these rules that apply to us that don't apply to them. And that's the exact definition of tyranny. And we have it in alleged democracy. Why not get rid of political parties like you were hinting at there, William, and just have people? You just, vote for the people. In fact, if they're chosen by lottery, there you go. And then you have term limits of 5 years for everything. You can be governor once, sheriff once, mayor once for life. There's no payback. There's no lobbying. The people are chosen at random, and then among them they can nominate. And why is the president allowed to appoint the directors of the FDA, the FBI, the Food and Drug Administration, all these agencies, Justice Department? Well, that means a corrupt president can put corrupt leaders over all the government and have corruption keep going. That's not right, is it? The FBI, they know the rank and file, who's honest and who's not, amongst themselves. Let them elect their own leader, which could be done by voting or by lottery, right? The president shouldn't be able to allow these departments. That would allow integrity, you see? So you need to rewrite all the rules so that it's fair. And maybe that would happen if the truth about the moon landing fraud came out.
Wow, that was amazing. What a great question, and then a fantastic answer, and so much added into it. And of course, I highly recommend people check out Moon Man by Bart Sibrel, or go on to Sibrel.com to get it. And I think I got mine on Amazon as well. Is it still on Amazon?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
The book, as far as I know, I think it's the only interactive book ever made. I thought I came up with the idea. It might not be original, or it may be. Basically, I write a chapter, and it's like, well, I'm about to talk about the movie, If Anything Happened on the Way to the Moon. So stop here, go to Sibrel.com, click on the top left button, Moon Man video links, and watch video link number 1. Write another chapter. I'm going to talk about Astronauts Gone Wild. So stop here, watch Astronauts Gone Wild, to come back, and when I talk about it, you know what I'm talking about it. So there's 17 interactive video clips, 15 officially in the published book, and 2 I've added since then, including the son of the man who made the deathbed testimony. This book took 15 years to write. It took 2 years to edit it. And as I'm editing it, we get access to a deathbed confession of an eyewitness of a person who saw them film Apollo 11 at his base. And let me just add real quickly, if I've ever done it quickly, probably not, but 4 proofs that independently of one another would prove that the moon landing is fake. And we have 4 times the evidence, right? Go to Sibrel.com, 3-minute video. You'll see the pictures of shadows parallel in sunlight intersecting in electrical light. That's what shadows do. That means electrical light means they're not on the moon. Secondly, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, also on the homepage of Sibrel.com, and it's one of the interactive links as well, where I go into greater detail. We have a 1-foot model of the Earth, of them pretending it to be halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight. That proves it. Then we have the logic. Okay, today, NASA, with 54 years better, that's an enormous amount, 5 decades of better rockets and computers, and the best that they can do, the farthest that they can send a human into space 54 years later, is 1,000th the distance to the moon. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. You see that? They can drive cars on the moon and play golf on the moon 50 years ago, but now they can only orbit the moon with mannequins because of the radiation. We go into great detail about this, and one of the clips is a NASA employee saying they can't go to the moon because of deadly radiation, and the technology to survive the radiation has not been invented yet. He says it out of his own mouth. Glenn Beck says, no, he doesn't. I say, have you seen the clip? Well, no. It's Santa Claus for him, right? So we have the logic because 54 years ago, in 1969, when all of NASA's computing power combined equaled 1/1,000,000th of a cell phone. When they had 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, the only time they were ahead of schedule, they went 1,000 times farther on the first attempt than they can do 54 years later with 54 years better technology. So what they're really saying is that for the first time in the history of the world, technology was better in the past and in the future, 1,000 times better. But that's historically and scientifically impossible. You see, if it weren't for people's emotional attachment, they would see it. I'm going to say it again, even though I've said it in other interviews. It's so important to understand. I talked to a college professor teaching aerospace at a major university who said even if he saw Buzz Aldrin on national TV tearfully confessing that the moon landings were faked, he would still think he walked on the moon anyway. You see that? You see how there's this block? People refuse to accept it. It has become a god to them. You see that? And then the fourth proof. Now, if I, no offense, let's pick on Sensum over there because he's not showing his face. Let's say I saw Sensum at the 7-Eleven or whatever your English equivalent is, shooting somebody in the head and taking the money. Me saying in court, I saw him do it. I'm 100% certain it was him. That's pretty damning testimony, don't you think? And so we have an eyewitness who saw them filming Apollo 11 at his base, and it's actually twice as powerful. You know why? If someone says, I see him do it, that's extremely powerful. You know what a court considers more powerful? When someone confesses something while they're dying. It's like considered, not officially, but pretty much twice as powerful, twice as convicting, twice as truthful when a person's dying and confesses something. You know what he confessed first? He said, I'm a murderer. This isn't in the book because his son was still alive. And in fact, his son, whose video is on the homepage of Sibrel.com, when he started telling me about his father's participation at the military base that he lived across the street from, the CIA showed up and threatened to kill him and his family for talking to me about his father's participation in the moon landing fraud less than 2 years ago. And the White House was involved in this investigation of his threats. So was the FBI, and so was the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. In any case, the guy said first out of his mouth, he's a murderer. And he's fearing the judgment of God, and he believes if you confess, you'll be forgiven. And pretty much if you believe the Bible, that's true. Confess and repent. Don't do it again. And you're forgiven. King David, a man after God's own heart, murdered a guy to cover up his adultery. Later forgiven. You see, we have a gracious God. We just have to repent. You have to repent to be saved. Otherwise, you're no different than the pagans. Wide and narrow paths, right? Few people repent. Most people don't, you see. Grace covers the rest. So he said, I'm a murderer. So his son said, who did you kill? He said, a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base. So the military police came in. His son called the military police. They came in. They investigated. Who did you kill? What year did you kill them? So forth and so on. Because the person, I guess, maybe their family never got closure. Maybe they say he was run over by a tractor and here's his body. Or maybe he just disappeared. It's probably what happened. I don't know. And then they said, why? Why did you kill another person? Well, the man was chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base. Every branch of the military has its special ops or intelligence CIA type division. The Army has it, the Navy has it, and the United States Air Force has it. And the headquarters of their special operations is at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. That's where the moon landing was filmed. The guy said President Johnson showed up June 1st, 1968 for the first of 3 days of filming, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. And he personally gave him a list of 15 VIP visitors who were allowed to come in. He was the chief of security. These people are allowed in, no one else. Neil Armstrong is on the list. Buzz Aldrin is on the list. Apparently they had doubles in their spacesuits. Von Braun is on the list. With Van Allen was on the list, and some people I never heard of, including a science fiction writer. We published that list in the book. Some of these are still alive, including Eugene Kranz, flight director, and Buzz Aldrin. He kept this list as a private souvenir, and we publish it in the book. So the first thing he says is, I killed a coworker as chief of security. And they say, well, why did you kill him? He says, because we both eyewitnessed the filming of the first fake moon landing. They put two airplane hangars together. They opened up the wall between them. They brought in this, concrete powder for weeks and weeks. They built the fake lunar set, brought in the lunar module, and we saw them film it. My coworker thought it was morally wrong. He says, this is wrong. I'm going to tell a reporter. And that he killed him to cover it up. You see, the fact that the moon landing was fake was really the second thing he said. First, he said, I'm a murderer. I killed another human being. And when they said why, he said, well, to cover up the moon landing fraud. I don't think you make that stuff up. So we have that proof, an eyewitness. We have the proof that you can't have 1,000 times greater technology in the past and in the future. It's impossible, right? Right there. We have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees. Can't be done in sunlight. It's impossible. That's proof. That's it. One picture. And then we have a 1-foot model of them faking being halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight. What more proof do you need? I mean, it just boggles the mind that people still believe it anyway. God in the Bible says he opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. Well, what is pride? Pride is simply the unwillingness to be wrong. That college professor refuses to be wrong, refuses to give it up. And it's different than JFK or 9/11, not only because it's a complete fictionalization when those two events did happen. It's also a positive lie. Kennedy's death was tragic. 9/11 was tragic. But this is what people wanted. This is candy, giving a child candy. And now I come along and I'm trying to take that candy away and give them a plate of manure instead. You're really eating manure. There's manure under that sugar. No, I want my sugar with manure underneath it. I'm saying, it's manure under there. It's going to kill you. And believe me, if these people don't get caught, and it looks like the only way they're going to get caught is by exposing the moon landing fraud. That's the only thing that's going to outrage the public enough. If they don't get caught, down the toilet, not just for America, for everybody in the world, because almost all the nations are following in line because of the threat of military attack by the United States of America. And don't think China and Russia aren't participating in the moon landing fraud. They are. People say it must be real because hundreds of thousands of people are involved. And I've explained that only 8 people knew about the atomic bomb. That involved 100,000 people. The CIA isn't stupid enough to tell the person making the glove or the boot, hey, we're really not going to the moon, don't tell anybody. But the person in command center, according to the flight director, can't tell the difference, right? And then they say, well, Russia and China would have spilled the beans. It's not true at all. I know someone who works in the command center of the Chinese Space Agency right now today. I can call him up right now. And he says everybody there knows the moon missions are fake. Apparently, China sent probes to the landing sites secretly, took pictures all over the place with the GPS coordinates on the Sea of Tranquility. Nothing there. Okay? And they have this proof. And they threatened America. In fact, he said they are blackmailing NASA. And NASA is giving them space technology, right, which is a treasonous act, right? That's a violation of the 1917 Espionage Act, among numerous other laws. And they're being blackmailed, you see? That's a more valuable use of the information than just blurting out to the world, blackmailing America for 54 years. Russia's doing the same thing. Why is it Vladimir Putin? Go to Sibrel.com, scroll down halfway. We have a video of Vladimir Putin being told by the AI team the moon missions are fake. Doesn't look surprised at all. He looks scared. Why wasn't that story on RT if RT is such, anti-American news site? Nowhere to be found. In fact, I put a comment about it in an AI story, a story about another AI event. All my other comments are up there, but not that one, when I point out that the AI just said the moon landings are fake. So Russia's apparently blackmailing us too. They like for the truth not to come out. If the truth comes out, they lose their blackmail power. You see what I'm saying? And so I think Russia and China and the CIA are probably big buddies, especially China, you know, and who knows what's really going on, right? We have to be just, I guess, realistic. China and Russia have no interest in attacking the continental United States. They have their own problems, right? Does America really want to occupy China or Russia? Why would we? We don't even have roads that work. We don't have schools that work. And the same thing in China. They have their own problems. No one's interested in conquering America. That's a lie for the military industrial complex to keep selling and buying bombs, right? So I don't know what to do. Is that my third or fourth rant? But,
that was great. That was excellent. You covered quite a lot there, so that was really good. Well done, Bart. What I was going to ask, I'll take it back to the Apollo program, and you got, I guess, would pleasure be the right word, or you got the opportunity, let's say, to meet most of the astronauts in the Apollo program, and most of them who seemingly walked on the moon. And my question is, it's kind of like a two-pronged question. How, out of the astronauts that you met, did any of them come across as convincing? And did at any point throughout your life, even up to now, did you think they were under some form of MK Ultra at the time of the program, or hypnosis, maybe?
I'm sure they considered doing that. But they couldn't do it. It's not reliable enough. You could take the only MK Ultra that I know about. I'm sure there were many other attempts we don't know about. Was probably Sirhan Sirhan. Sirhan, as best as I could tell, was there, and he did fire a gun, but it was probably just in the air, and that was enough. We saw him with the gun. We saw him pull the trigger, and that was plenty enough to frame the guy for it. As best as we can tell, Robert Kennedy's security guard is the one who shot him. How ironic is that? You see how slimy the federal government is? Kennedy's Secret Service assigned to protect him was complicit in killing him. You see how slimy they are? And Oswald, as best as I can tell, was trying to prevent the assassination of Kennedy undercover for the FBI. And they framed him for it. You see how slimy they are? And so hypnotizing somebody and having them articulate lies about, rockets and computers and landing and experiences is just not reliable enough. To have a liar, you need an intelligent, sober person. None of them really are good liars. The best one was Eugene Cernan because he was on the last mission. He had the most preparatory time. Now, I've taught workshops, including for the Screen Actors Guild. I've taught editing workshops, acting workshops, dozens and dozens of hours. I've taken hundreds of hours of acting myself. I've been on stage over 500 times. And I can tell you that Eugene Cernan had acting lessons. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know, it's kind of subtle, like the wine thing. When someone plays a violin a certain way, you can kind of tell that they had this type of teaching, theoretically, right? And the way that he speaks and the way he visualizes things, he's had acting classes. But if you've seen Astronauts Gone Wild, I zoomed in under his arms and he's got tons of sweat because he can be, like this as much as you want, but inside he's sweating. And these interviews that I did in Astronauts Gone Wild, I basically did them under the pretext of doing a documentary about the moon landings, which is true. They just assumed that I thought that they were real. So in some of them, I would put up a monitor beside them, ask them some softball questions, and then I would show them the footage of fake photography. And in one instance, one guy turns beet red, says, "Where did you get this footage?" And he literally assaults me, literally on camera. And this is in the film Astronauts Gone Wild, and it's one of the links in the book. And in the commotion, I'm assaulted. I accidentally leave this very high quality wireless microphone on him. And my camera guy and so, disturbed, he forgets to stop record. So while the camera is in the back seat of the rental car as we're leaving, we have the wireless microphone still on the guy in his house with the door closed. He forgets it's on. We forget he has it. And we're unknowingly recording the audio. These microphones work for at least a half a mile. And so I drive, several blocks away, and I'm like, I left my, $800 microphone there. Better go back and get it, or however much it cost. And all the while, we're recording their private conversations in their house. Well, the film secretary did a transcript of everything months later. She calls me up frantically. Bart, do you know what they're talking about in their house before you U-turned and got your mic back? I'm like, I don't know what. She says they're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. And I'm like, that's funny. She says, no, Bart, they're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. I'm like, that's pretty funny. She says, Bart, you're not listening. They're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. And sure enough, they are. Do you want to call the CIA and have them whacked? Why does an Apollo astronaut on a civilian mission have the CIA in his Rolodex? And why, if they really went to the moon, is the CIA going to kill someone investigating whether they went to the moon or not? You see, that's another proof. And that would be proof number 5. You could say proof number 6 is the fact that they destroyed all the original videotapes, all the original diagrams, all the original telemetry recordings of whether the rocket was. I mean, come on. Would Bill Gates spend $200 billion building the first AI computer, and it works fantastic, and then he throws it and all the diagrams in a furnace? No one would ever do that. Maybe they could have considered doing that with the atomic bomb, but they didn't. Atomic bombs 10 years later, 10 years, just 10 years after the first explosion, were 1,000 times more powerful. So if they could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1/millionth the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now. There'd be bases all over the moon. That's the way technology progresses. Except going to the moon, they're more technologically advanced in the past when they can drive cars and play golf on the moon. And today we can only orbit the moon with mannequins. You see that? Hello? Anybody paying attention? You don't destroy a $200 billion investment. Now, if you perpetrated a fraud, that's exactly what you would do. Because one of the questions that Astronauts Gone Wild is, okay, it's 250 degrees outside this tinfoil box, attracting all this heat and sunlight, and you have air conditioning that you claimed gets it down to a perfect 72 degrees. What is powering the air conditioning 24 hours for 3 days? You said batteries. I'm like, batteries? Yeah, like the kind in your car. We just had a bunch of them, like 8. Really? I mean, you see, technically that's not possible. I mean, first of all, it's 250 degrees down to 72. I don't even know that you could do that with electrical power. That's going to take, I don't know, 3 hours, I would think, to get it down to 72. And then if you only had 8 car batteries to do that on, I don't even think they'd last 3 hours. You know what I mean? So that's why they destroyed all the schematics, all the diagrams. You see, you would never destroy that investment if you really went to the moon. But if you were perpetrating a fraud, that's exactly what you would do. They destroyed the original videotapes the day before they were going to be transferred to HD by Ron Howard for his IMAX film. That's when they all disappeared. You see that? They would never do that if they really went, but they would do that if they committed a fraud. So that's proof of the fraud. Do you see that? That's the 6th proof, right? And I don't know what to say. You could add their expressions at the press conference as the 7th proof, even though that's incidental, but something's off, definitely. So what can you do? This is our world. Save yourself from this corrupt generation.
Yeah, I mean, the press conference, holy moly. I've looked at quite a bit of statement analysis as well with what they said. And even some of the AI has pointed out, well, yeah, it sounds a bit suspicious and it sounds like there is potential that they're lying. So you can sense it just watching it. But yeah, that was great. And interesting you mentioned Gene Cernan, because when I watched both your documentaries and interviews by Gene and all the other men who seemingly walked on the moon, Gene came across as sort of the most convincing. And when you've pointed out that he had potentially had acting lessons, yeah, I can see that now. That the penny sort of dropped there for me. That yeah, he definitely got schooled a lot better than the previous guys. So yeah, that was great. I'll let Sensum get a question in now if he's still there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One, just to go on from, the elaborate lengths that the security services went to try and stifle any form of revelation. I mean, you've touched on it yourself when you mentioned, the CIA guys literally following. I know you took like a 250-mile taxi ride with some guy who, the taxi guy that you were in the cab with, took you to a place where other taxi guys hung out just so you could get a ride. And this guy took you, and he ended up being a sort of a mini hero in certain respects, because he stood by you when these guys were trying to bully you. And then obviously the incident with the lawyer coming out of his address that was sort of linked to the CNN building, which, it just so he was in that same postal district, if you like, but without those, it's absolutely shocking. But do you think, I mean, probably with the exception of, the interactions with minors, shall we say, because obviously we're on YouTube, we can't we can't come out and say the P word, shall we say, but probably with the exception of that, do you think the security services nowadays are less interested in squashing so-called conspiracy theories now, particularly after the COVID period? Because, and
be careful using the C word there.
Yeah. I think we're allowed to name it now, but I don't think you're allowed to say anything.
I always say the event for the last 3 years, just in case.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So the event in recent time. For me, I get the feeling that they're probably less interested now, and I'll quote Alexander Solzhenitsyn, sort of paraphrasing, where he said, "We know they're lying. They know we know they're lying, and they don't care." And I get that kind of feeling now, because everybody can see that all of these new stories that are coming out time and time again, I mean, the rhetoric surrounding the conflict in Eastern Europe and various other things, it's sort of the kind of things that maybe would have passed in the 80s and the 90s. Now people have slightly better vision, shall we say, but they'll still keep on pushing it because they literally don't care what we think. Do you think that's the case, that they are, with the exception of until it becomes normalized, which is a great push, particularly with the likes of Hollywood and the regime, the interference of minors, shall we say, until that becomes normalized, that's probably, in my opinion, one of the few areas that the services or security services will either leverage to their benefit, in as much as like honey traps, and then they've got sort of dirt on people to push in their direction, but also cover up if it's one of their favored people. But with regards to other things that we've seen coming out recently, do you think they're less bothered about trying to disprove these things because they literally don't care anymore? They don't care that we know that they're lying, because it's where we are as a society, and pretty much across the West and wider Anglosphere. There's just that complete and utter derision of ordinary people now. They literally don't care what we think.
Well, they do care. If they didn't care, there wouldn't be censorship, right? I've got 3 bulletins or 3 takedowns from YT in the past month or so, from videos that are 3 or 4 years old. So they're scouring my 200 and something videos I have up there, and they're removing things that have been up there for I did a video that came out September 9th, 2016. This is 5 months before Mr. F from the White House, the guy in charge of diseases and things, said that there will be an outbreak. And I saw them moving these chess pieces into place, getting ready for this event we've been going through for the last 3 years. I said on September 9th, 2016, they're planning on such an event, that they will either release something to make it happen or they will stage something to make it happen, right? That's what I said. They took that down. You see, they do care. And let me tell you, when the former director of the Russian Space Agency, you see, I think he was not allowed to say the moon landings were fake when he was in office, and probably not supposed to say it ever. But he's retiring and he's going to die soon. Maybe he has cancer or something. He said, I don't know how many months ago it was, coming up on a year ago. I don't remember. Maybe not that long, 6 months, 8 months, something like that. And it made the online news. It wasn't as suppressed as the AI one was, that the former Russian director of their space agency put the first satellite in space, the first animal in space, the first man in space, the first woman in space, the first of 2 spacecrafts at the same time, the first spacewalk. Every space milestone they did first until the Americans faked the moon landing. They were so much more advanced. That guy said the moon missions were fake a few months ago. The next day, I get a call from Fox News, anti-deep state Fox News. That's baloney, right? Now, I'm not saying I agree with Mr. TC, but to cancel the most popular program on your network, if you're in the business to make money, that would be the stupidest thing you could possibly do. So why would they cancel Fox, their most popular program, unless their goal is information control? Now, they were bought out by the Disney Corporation, 3 years ago, and I knew they wouldn't start firing people right away. I said it at the time. They're not going to fire people right away, but they'll gradually do it like a frog in a pot. They're interested in information control, mind control, psychological control, not through subtle things, through direct things. You don't need to do subliminal advertising. You don't. If I see a pizza commercial, you know what I want? I think a pizza would be good now. You know what I mean? I see a hamburger commercial. Hey, I think I'd like a hamburger. I see people drinking and clubbing. Hey, let's go out and drink a club. You see what I'm saying? You don't need although not that they're not doing it. So the day after they, made the news, the former Russian guy of the space agency says the moon missions are fake. I get a call from Fox News. We want to do an hour-long special about the alleged faking of the moon landings. And they said the following, and I appreciate their honesty with that particular team. We've never read your book. We've never seen any of your films. We haven't done any investigation. And we will conclude that the moon missions are real at the end of the program. Do you understand? Had they not paid me $2,000, right, I wouldn't have done the program, right? I only did it because I got bills to pay like everybody else, and I at least got to say a little bit. But this is supposed to be a news organization. News has to do with investigating. One person says this, another person says that. Who's telling the truth? It's often not the person who it looks like. You see what I'm saying? Criminals can be polished and look completely innocent, and they can frame other people. So a news person's job, if they really are news and not propaganda, right, by the CIA or whoever, is to investigate, right? They said we're not doing any investigation. We haven't read your book, haven't seen your films. The intent of the program is to conclude that the moon missions are real, to reassure people. And when did they call me? The day after, right? The day after it made the news that the former Russian space agency director said the moon missions were fake. They had to put that fire out immediately, right? Then Glenn Beck, right? He had to show fairness. He had me on radio for 10 minutes, but then he has on the Apollo astronaut for an hour on video, right? and he fawns over him because I know America's gotten bad, but at least we went to the moon. There's only one Apollo astronaut, only one, who has the audacity to say that he's a Christian. If you read the New Testament, it says many, 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 many people who claim to be Christians are not. In fact, most of the New Testament is rebuking churches full of worldliness, paganness, and immorality, right? And it's, the expression wolves, what is it? Wolves in sheep's clothing. That comes from the New Testament rebuking fake Christians, right? So they parade, they're Christian. I'm a Christian, therefore I must be telling the truth. So disgusting, right? So they do care. And they wouldn't be warning people if you click on the link about the AI proving the moon missions are fake, that you'll be associated with child pornography. They wouldn't be doing that if they didn't care. They wouldn't be doing censorship if they didn't care. So what percentage of people are awake? Well, here's what I go by. 75% of Americans believe that Oswald did not kill Kennedy. But there's a lot of information about that. 50% doubt the storyline on 9/11. And apparently approaching, if not at 25% of Americans believe the craziest of all conspiracy theories. And you could say the epitome, the perfect example, the poster child of conspiracy theories, faking the moon landing. 25% of Americans think the moon landing. And you know what they quote? They quote a survey every time from 25 years ago. But in 1999, it was only, 6%. They don't quote modern surveys. Do you understand that? So the Fox special, get this. I watched the Fox special. And in the Fox special, get this. This is how corrupt Fox News is. They quote one Russian scientist who said in 1969, congratulations on the moon landings. And they say, see, even Russia says they're real. They don't quote the guy from 6 weeks earlier who was the director of the Russian Space Agency. They don't quote him, who said they were fake, the whole reason the show was produced. They don't mention that at all. They mention one scientist from 1969 and say, see, Russia says it was real. Can you believe that? This is Fox News. Allegedly anti-corruption, allegedly an alternative view of the news. And then RT, when Putin himself is there, getting the result on camera of the AI saying the moon missions are fake, nowhere to be found on RT. And a comment about it gets removed. I mean, come on. They do care. Now, to what degree do they care? Well, I remember meeting a guy out at a swimming in the river somewhere in Nashville, Tennessee. And I guess he had heard of me or something. And he said, there are more people awake than you know. And that's encouraging. There's a segment in the Bible, somewhere in the Old Testament, where there's a prophet of God. He says, I'm the only guy left. Help me, Lord. It's just me. I'm the only faithful one. And God says, no, that's not really the case. You got 7,000 people over here who are faithful to me. And so here's the thing. I believe this little scenario we've been going through for the last 3 years is completely made up. Here's why. You have, let's say, 75% of the people who believe what they're told on the news, but you have 25% of the people who don't. And guess what? The 25% are 4 times as vocal as the 75%. So do they care about the 25%? You better believe they do. They are infiltrating podcasts. They are infiltrating Fox News, infiltrating RT. They're infiltrating everybody and everything. And they can push our buttons too. We have a military source who says, okay, 6 months ago, there's a guy being paraded around on Fox News who says aliens are real, alien corpses are real, and alien spacecraft are real. And they said, well, did you see the corpses? Did you see the spacecraft? He says, no. Someone told me that they're real in the military. I mean, come on. They say my source isn't credible when the son of the man who eyewitnessed it, who saw his father's deathbed confession, who lived across from Cannon Air Force Base, who said his father was chief of security, right? who gave me the list of 15 people, they say that's not credible. And yet, when the alien guy is paraded, they must want people to believe in aliens. Little side note, Stephen Greer, if he's sincere, and I hope he is, you can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. Okay? His number one proof, get this, his number one proof that aliens are real is the Apollo astronauts say so. He thinks the moon landings are real. Now, if he cannot discern whether the moon landings are real or not when there's 4 times the proof necessary to understand that they're fake, then how could he possibly discern whether there's aliens real or not? People want to believe in the League of Planets. It's like Santa Claus for adults, just like the moon landing. How glorious and interesting, League of Planets or whatever. Maybe just doesn't want to give up that colorful thing. I cried for hours when I found out there was no Santa Claus. Cried for hours and hours. Broke my heart. And so maybe, but the point is, if he can't discern whether the moon landings are real or not, I'm not going to trust his opinion about anything, right? And if they're parading aliens on Fox News, but not the truth about the moon landing fraud, they don't want you to know the truth, then they must want you to believe a lie. And it's the Apollo astronauts who spent their entire life saying the moon landings are real who are telling you that aliens are real. You see, von Braun's own secretary said out of his own mouth, the next thing the government is going to fake or contrive or whatever is an asteroid threat, and they can fake asteroids. It's called the Thor Project. After that, they're going to fake an alien invasion. That's out of the mouth of von Braun, who faked the moon landing, which was the greatest historical event at the time. If aliens appear, it's the greatest historical event of all time, you see? And it looks like that might be fake coming down the pike, too. So this is the odd things that are going on. And so I don't know what to say, except they do care what the 25% says. And to what degree, I don't know. I do know, as you know from the book, again, it's an audio that I read myself, Kindle or print at Sibrel.com. In August of 1991, Bill Casey, right, the guy who worked at NASA for 6 years, who said before I did that the moon missions are fake, my good friend, my number one source at NASA, right? Imagine right now if I got a call coming in from Buzz Aldrin. Him calling me rather than me tracking him down, right? That would be extraordinary, right? So this guy who wrote a book called We Never Went to the Moon, who was one of the first guests on Oprah saying we didn't go to the moon. In August of 1991, he gets a phone call from Apollo astronaut James Irwin, who says he had just become a born-again Christian. I read that this morning in my Bible, John chapter 3. You cannot enter the kingdom of heaven unless you're born again. You know what I mean? You said, what was it like when I realized? It's an epiphany. It's epiphany. I remember trying to learn how to swim. I can't do it. I can't. And then it clicked. I remember before that trying to ride a bike. How do people balance on that wheel? I just can't do it. And then it clicked. And now I can't not balance. You see? And so you have to be born again to enter heaven. You have to have this completely different thinking. I know it may sound silly, but there's a really good comedy out there that I've seen multiple times, Land of the Lost with Will Ferrell. From a cinematography, filmmaking point of view, beautiful, just excellent, super, super craftsmanship in that movie. But at the very end, the kind of redneck hippie character tells to Will Ferrell, who is literally being transformed, born again. I have very few films in my library, very few on DVD. And every one of them, I realized, is about a person being born again. Groundhog Day, jerk to good person. And Will Ferrell, in one of the most beautiful films, Stranger Than Fiction. He's not a jerk, but he's like, lost and saved, or sleep and awake, you see? And so that's what you have to do. So James Irwin, even though he claimed to be a Christian beforehand, a Christian is not knowing that Jesus is the Messiah. That's like I'm saved because I know the sky is blue. James chapter 2 says even the demons believe in God. You see, so acknowledging there's a God doesn't save you. Acknowledging Jesus is the Messiah doesn't save you. You have to repent to prove that you love God. It says this is love for God, to obey. If you really love God, you'll repent. If you don't repent, you don't love God, right? And you have an epiphany, right? You have an epiphany when you truly become a Christian. And James Irwin had that epiphany. He had gone to church after church, and apparently he found a real church and got rebaptized, right? And he immediately called up Bill Casey, an Apollo astronaut, calling up the lead investigator, which would be equivalent of me today, and says, we need to talk about your book, We Didn't Go to the Moon. He says, I'm concerned for my security. Can you call me at this number 3 days from now? And on that day, he had a fatal heart attack. And people say, oh, that's just a coincidence. He had 2 heart attacks before. Well, duh. That's why they shot him with the heart attack gun, and a little needle, or put heart attack poison in his iced tea in a restaurant. Duh. So it would slide under the radar as an assassination. The guy Chavez in South America, they killed him with cancer. Steve Jobs, they killed him. He was assassinated, in my opinion. I'm virtually 100% sure. You think they're going to shoot a bullet in the guy's head? It's too gosh darn obvious. He had a rare form of cancer, extremely rare, right? Extremely rare. And it went to the pancreas. You know what that means? That means he was poisoned with radioactivity. And all the billions of dollars in the world, when you're poisoned by radioactivity, there's nothing you can do. Tick tock, tick tock. No cure under the sun from radiation sickness if it crosses the line. Nothing you can do. Why did they take him down? I can tell you why. I've had a Mac since 1991. And you've always had 2 choices to eliminate your garbage. Delete trash, right, which erases the directory of the file, not the file. They don't do that until the space is needed. Or secure delete trash, which follows actually the Pentagon protocol for digital erasure. Do you know if you erase a tape or a magnetic device, there's still pretty strong trace of the information underneath it, pretty strong. You might know this from audio recording. You erase a tape and you can hear it faintly in there still. It erases it 6 times. Probably there'd be a tiny bit left after the 3rd erasure, probably nothing left after the 4th erasure. So they add 2 more. They erase it 6 times. Okay, so get this. There are certain times where it forces you to upgrade in your software. And so Steve Jobs dies. 6 weeks later, they force you to upgrade your system, and secure delete trash is no longer there. And didn't Steve Jobs tell the FBI and the CIA to FO when it comes to backdoor encryption permission? And isn't Apple the most powerful, rich country on the planet? I think he was murdered. I think it's crystal clear that the guy was murdered. So they're monitoring phone calls. They're keeping up with it. They can't take me down. It's too obvious. They can't take down other certain people. Won't mention their names. But that'd be too obvious. And it's too amateurish, too. Really, a lot of times. They used to say, be careful, bullets are cheap. Now they say, you're not worth a bullet. We can control what people think. You know what I mean? We can release, they had an affair 20 years ago, and how would they even know that, right? Unless they're recording everything. How is it possible that the private conversation between a president of the United States and another foreign leader, that the transcript is published in the New York Times, and Tucker Carlson thinks 3 years later that they're spying on the president? You didn't remember that story from 3 years earlier? I mean, how would you get a transcript? You know what I mean? It's the CIA monitoring the president of the United States. And it's not just they're picking on one. They do it for everybody. Make sure they play ball. And if you don't play ball, they will take you down one way or another. And so they do care. It's not that they don't care. It's how they do it is a little bit different. Here's another thing. 2012. In 2012, they made it mandatory. I think I talk about this in the book. They made it mandatory that all digital HD, all radio and TV stations are required by law to be HD on January 1st, 2012. No choice. You're breaking the law if you don't do it. Okay, I don't understand why they're so concerned about audio and video quality, right? Oh, what a surprise. Built into the codec, meaning the program, the kind of firmware program, is a 12-second, or is it 10-second delay? 10-second delay. 10-second delay. Listen to NPR or CBS Evening News or whatever you want to do, and dial up radio station WWV in Fort Collins, Colorado on your cell phone, right? And listen to the atomic clock. Pretty soon they're going to have to move it forward 10 seconds. But in any case, you hear ding, boop, top of the hour, and then 10 seconds later, the news starts. So more advanced technology is slower. Okay. You had, what's his name? Richard Pryor, do Saturday Night Live like in 1977 or something. And they put in a 5-second delay for fear he would say a curse word. I mean, the guy's a professional. Give me a break. But he cursed in his stand-up comedy, and they thought he would slap. So paranoid. Anyway, so they put a 5-second delay in there. Plenty of time. You see? Imagine if an Apollo astronaut gets a conscience, walks into NBC, where most of the employees are sincere. They're just doing what they're told to keep their job. And they say, I'm an Apollo astronaut. I'm going to have something important to say. Can you put me on live, top of the newscast? Trust me, you'll be glad you did. And he starts confessing the moon missions are fake. They can take it out. They can have a solar storm. They can have static on your TV before it ever hits. You see what I'm saying? Why would they do that? You see? I don't know. I mean, they do care, obviously. I know that's a long answer to your question, but I don't know. I mean, it's just so bizarre. I've said this a few times, but when I saw the Truman Show back whenever that came out, I think it was a Tuesday, at noon, because I work for myself. I'm the only one in the theater watching the Truman Show at noon, on a Tuesday. And I walk out of the thing. I'm like, I'm a bit of a snob, maybe, as a filmmaker back then. Like, this is dumb. This is the dumbest story I've ever seen. It's not plausible. The whole world around one guy and blah, 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 blah. I walk out. This is dumb. Now I watch it once a year and I cry every time at the end. But if I wrote a script and send it to somebody in Hollywood and I said, okay, I want you to do a story about the best country in the world that all the immigrants want to come to, that, is the bastion of truth and justice and the American way. And they're end up being the most corrupt. They murder their own people. They fake, the greatest historical event in all time. Every department is corrupt, from the FBI to the FDA, blah, 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 blah. And they monitor your phone calls and they censor things, even though they claim to be free speech, and they fake moon landings and blah, blah, blah. No one would produce it. They say, we need something believable. And what is that title of the film? Stranger Than Fiction. The strangest thing about the moon landing fraud is that it's true. They really did. It's just so mind-blowing. They really did fake the moon landing. And until that truth is known, mankind is doomed. The truth has to come out. And like I said, it's the key. It's the key. And these people who say they're anti-fraud in the federal government need to talk about it. I mean, there are people who are very influential podcasters who haven't had me on in 2 years since we've had this deathbed confession. That's not news. An eyewitness to the moon landing fraud. It's not news that the AI said the moon missions were fake. It's not news that the former Russian director of the space agency said they're fake. I would think if you want to bring down the federal government, and the NBC news director and I say, and a reviewer says, this is the key, because once the public knows the moon landings are fake, they will never trust the federal government again. And that's what we want. That's what we need. We need the key to open the door, and it is the moon landing fraud being exposed.
Excellent. That was great. Do you want to come back in on that, Sensen, before I ask another question? I'm cautious of the time here. But
No,
do you
mate,
want?
that was a fantastic answer. Once again, very, very well structured, very elaborate, and 100% true. It's no, it was a great response. Thank you once again.
Sure, no problem. If we need to go, we need to go. Just please send me the link of it, and maybe I'll share it on my channel if with your permission. And just put Sibrel.com in the link. I busted my butt, and I pay my bills, about a third of them from book sales. So, I mean, it's a great book, I think. I spent a lot of time on it. It has 17 video clips. The audio is around $10. The print is 20, and the Kindle somewhere in between. It supports my work. And then I have a podcast too at Sibrel.com that's subscriber only, one called Box Escape, to think outside of the box, even for alternative media, which, as I said, can be misled. There's a button on Sibrel.com to join that podcast, and a second one, 2 a week, at the next tier, called End Times Church, where I talk about kind of scriptural things and current events as they tie into the scriptures as well. All of that is at Sibrel.com.
Excellent. Have you got? Is it all right to fit in one more question? Is that all right with you, Bart? Yeah. It was in relation to. I know in the book you've got the names, 15 names in the book relating to where they filmed the landing, or the fake landing, should we say? And you've got the guy Robert Emenegger in it,
Right.
who's like a sci-fi filmmaker, quite unknown, or he was at least until until now, until the book came out. But of course, a lot of people point to Stanley Kubrick, and obviously there's clues in different movies that he's done. But what do you know of that can connect Kubrick to NASA out with the clues that are in films?
Yeah, this list that I have is of the visitors list, not of the crew list. Okay, they had doubles in the astronaut suits. That's why they had visors where you couldn't see their faces. In fact, one person believes that Bruce Lee was one of the doubles because of his physical stamina, because the backpacks had no air conditioning in them because they would fall over backwards. So, and he was murdered on like the fifth anniversary, or he died on the fifth anniversary of the moon landing, on that day or something like that. He died on July 20th, someday in the 70s. So I think that's a possibility. Kubrick likely was involved. There's an alleged interview of him on the internet. That's a fake interview. It's a mockery of him doing it. I don't know if it's to discredit the fact that he really did or what, but they referred to my punch, which didn't happen until 3 years after he died. But in any case, in the film The Shining, there's the little, boy who has on a hand-knit Apollo 11 shirt. And there are other clues that seem to indicate that he participated, at least in the filming of the first fake moon landing, including his last film, Eyes Wide Shut, which he insisted have the theatrical release of the 30th anniversary of the launch to the moon. He insisted it open on the 30th anniversary of the launch to the moon. And he died before the film came out. Like he wanted that as a deathbed, desire. They did fake the moon landing, so they had to have someone in charge of the fake pictures. They basically had two choices. They could hire the general of the media department at the Pentagon that shoots, recruitment videos, and use them. They'd have good security, but very amateur results. Or they could hire the best filmmaker on the planet and have good results and worry about security later. That would be what I would choose. If you can't convince people that they're real, you're sunk. So you have to hire the best filmmaker. And what was he doing in 1968? He was shooting a film about going to the moon. 2001: A Space Odyssey. And they intentionally had them look different so that you would have what a fake moon landing set looked in 2001, and then what a real moon landing set looked like in Apollo 11. They say what is Kubrick's best film? It's Apollo 11. And I think he was such a chess player and such an intellect that he probably took it as an intellectual challenge to make a film so convincing that was fictional that people thought it was real. He probably got high off of that intellectually. And I believe he did film Apollo 11. Now, get this, Apollo 12 allegedly, accidentally, pointed the video camera into the sun a minute and a half into the flight. So there was no images from Apollo 12. Apollo 13 launched on April 13th, that at 13:13 military time had an alleged accident. Give me a break. It was because people complained that the TV networks were running reruns of, but no, it was the other way around. So basically, after they went to the moon the second time and were broadcasting it, people weren't interested. And so imagine if they're doing, let's say they're planting a flag at the South Pole right now for the first time. We'd pause or we'd reschedule just to watch it, right? But if they're doing it the second time during our interview, we're not watching it, are we? So people were complaining that reruns of I Love Lucy were being interrupted when they went to the moon the second time. So the very next one was this life or death jeopardy, and 13's an Illuminati number, right? Then they go back on 14. That's a 2-year difference between Apollo 11. Remember, the camera pointed in the sun. So they had 2 years to get their act together. And I believe some of the later missions were filmed in England at that dirigible hangar at Carrington Base Airfield. And there's a lot of evidence for that. But Kubrick likely was involved in the first one. That would have been my choice. He's the logical choice. And it's not necessarily relevant. The big issue is really they did fake it. That's the most important thing. Where they filmed it or how they filmed it or who did it, that's kind of incidental, in my opinion. But we do know where they filmed it. An eyewitness told us so. Cannon Air Force Base, June 1st, 2nd and 3rd of 1968. That's brand new information. Never been out, only published in my book. And so is the 4-hour interview of Betty Grissom, who told me that on January 26, 1967, her husband came home from work and said, "Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today, inspecting the equipment." The very next day, he's dead from faulty equipment because a few days earlier, he had held an impromptu press conference where he took reporters up to the top of the rocket and put a lemon at the top of the rocket, calling it a piece of junk without permission, which infuriated his superiors, and they eliminated him. It was also a good way to pressure future astronauts into cooperating. Otherwise, they might have a similar fate. So that information is in the book for the first time, The Eyewitness. And then all my exploits dealing with the CIA is in the book for the very first time in 2 chapters. One called The Funny Thing Happened on the Way to CNN, and another, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Church. I literally was followed. Once I found the secret tape, I'm followed from church. They disable my car while it's running somehow. And I'm on foot, literally being chased by people. I hire a cab to drive me to Atlanta, where I'm about to give the tape through the back door of the alley of CNN. I'm surrounded by government agents who drug me with truth serum, so strong to the point of vomiting. I escape their custody. I make my way back to Nashville, and I say I got him. I pee in a cup, and I say I'm going to prove I was drugged by this exotic drug. I take it to a lab, give it to a friend to put in his name, not mine, thinking I can outwit the CIA. And after a few days, I say, "Well, what are the results?" He said, "Well, there was a problem at the lab." And I'm like, "Well, what problem was that?" He said, "Well, they had a break-in over the weekend." I'm like, "Yeah, so what?" He said, "Well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was a urine sample." So those people were like, "We don't know who you are, but please take your business elsewhere." So anyway, all these adventures are in the book for the first time. Oh, by the way, William, how many CIA agents does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Ooh, 10.
Well, I can tell you, then I have to kill you.
Yep, I can imagine. Just quickly, if we can fit one more in. I know Sensam's got a question in regards to Buzz Aldrin. If we can finish off on that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
Yeah, it was just a quick one. It was just that everyone knows about the often publicized bouts of depression and alcoholism suffered by Colonel Buzz Aldrin. Do you think that he was plagued with these demons because of the way he was affected by this deception?
Absolutely. I've talked to him privately on several occasions. Most of which is, some of which is in the book and some is not. He made it clear to me, and so did Neil Armstrong. I've talked to him privately. They both made it clear to me I am correct, and good luck trying to prove it. We have actually Buzz Aldrin admitting it twice on camera in Astronauts Gone Wild, where he thinks the story broke nationwide when we show him the proof. And
yeah,
he says,
ABC Digital. I remember that.
That's
one,
right.
I was listening to that, and he thought it was ABC proper, and yeah,
that's right.
That was,
and he says, "Oh, and this makes you a famous journalist for discovering this. What an ego you must have to want to become famous by proving the moon landings are fake." Well, how could I be famous if I'm wrong? And then he goes on to say, him and Neil Armstrong were just passengers. Okay, that means they never landed. They're just orbiting the Earth. And then when he realized he made 2 admissions, he takes it back and says, "I'll sue you if you show those admissions to anybody." We have that on camera as well. So if you want to subscribe to my podcast, in about 2 weeks, I think, I'm going to have an interview with a man who Buzz Aldrin told that the moon missions were fake. And he told him when he was extremely drunk at a party. And second to sodium pentothal, truth serum is alcohol. And you should know, if you've ever gotten bombed, you start telling your boss off and, talking pretty freely, and sometimes too much so with the opposite sex you're trying to have a date with and making a fool of yourself. But in any case, he told it. And this is going to be exclusively on my podcast in a couple of weeks, this interview with the man who Buzz Aldrin said we didn't go to the moon. And it definitely bothered him. He told me, he believes in God. And that's why he did not swear on the Bible. You see, the only people who swore on the Bible are the 2 avowed atheists, who curse as their common tongue and lie. And they don't have a problem because they don't believe in God and believe in the Bible. But the one who did wouldn't do it. Neil Armstrong wouldn't do it. Buzz Aldrin wouldn't do it. And so, yeah, it definitely bothers him. I'm going to talk about that in an upcoming podcast. If you go to Sibrel.com, there's that podcast button, I think, underneath the logo of the book, and you'll be able to see that interview in about 2 weeks.
Excellent. Yeah, I always got the impression Buzz had this weighing on top of him. And I guess if you're holding down such a lie, even just maybe a small lie, it eats away at you and it would just destroy you. I think we've seen that with Buzz early on, and I think you've seen it in Neil as well quite a bit. And they
well, that's
seem
why
to
he
struggle
didn't
with
give
it
interviews
throughout life.
Yeah, he didn't want to lie. That's why he didn't give interviews. And one of the times, I think it was some anniversary, 25th or 30th or whatever, some reporter tracked him down at an air show and says, "Well, what do you think about this anniversary?" He says, "It's not for what I did. It's for what America did." And he smirks, And then, as you know, from a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, when President Clinton twisted his arm to appear and speak in the White House, there were a group of students going by. And he says, maybe to the students someday, with tears in his eyes, maybe someday you'll be able to remove one of truth's protective layers. So
that's a great way to end it. That I've seen that interview, fascinating stuff, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you coming back on. I'm cautious of the time, although I could probably keep you here all day, to be honest. I'm sure Sensum is the same. So I'll thank you, and I'll thank Sensum. And what I'll do is I'll end the stream, and we can say our goodbyes in the I guess backstage, if that's okay.
Sure, no problem.
Cool, excellent. So thanks again, Bart, and make sure that you go to Sibrel.com It's in the description, and make sure you search Bart Sibrel on YouTube, and you will not be disappointed. That is a guarantee. And thanks to everyone who joined in the chat, and I will catch you again very soon, right? So take care, folks, and yeah, remember, do not comply.